Stefan. Good morning, everyone. It's a real thrill for me to be here. Gordon, have I done something with you guys before? Well, I have, haven't I? Many, many years ago, so it's a real thrill to be back, in a sense. I'm known for many things. One of the things I am known for is telling terrible dad jokes. I've got one of those minds that just sees things and thinks, oh, that's interesting. Like Mr. O'Keefe, for example. You'd say he's the dean of the university. See what I did there?
Dean.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Now, there's a gentleman here. What's your first name again?
Bronte.
Bronte, yes. Hallow be thy name.
That's very clever.
His surname is Hallow, by the way. So, sorry for picking on both of you, but I've got one of those crazy minds that just wanders, you know. So I'll start off with a few really bad dad jokes. Is that okay? Just a couple. So I met the guy who invented windowsills the other day. What a ledge. So I was going to this fancy dress party, and a friend of mine who was coming along, he said he was going to dress up as an island off the coast of Italy. I said, don't be so silly. Yeah, I know. Anyway, let me start at the very beginning. I was very young when I was born. I was born in a country called Zambia. I lived there for a couple of years, and while we were there, actually, let me start at the beginning. My mom and dad were both medical people. Dad was a doctor, mom was a nurse. They met in a hospital, and my brother was born in 74, I was born in 76, so he's always been 2 years older than me. And then we moved from Lusaka, Zambia, we moved to Nairobi. And it was there in Nairobi that my mom noticed something that gave her pause for thought. She discovered at various family gatherings that there were children running around who bore more than a passing resemblance to my brother and I. So she made some inquiries and discovered that my dad had actually been married to another lady that he'd never mentioned. He'd also had 10 children with her, and he'd never mentioned that. In fact, he'd had 12 children with her, 2 had died very young. And it basically never came up in conversation, so he didn't bother mentioning it, you know. Now that's not so bad. The fact is, you can marry other people, but he hadn't divorced the first woman when he married my mom. So that was complicated. And she, far from getting any sympathy from the extended family on discovering this, was told to just settle down and get on with it. And so she said, well, I can't do that, and she was quite distraught and went back to Zimbabwe. My dad took my brother and I and tried to reconcile, but that didn't work. In any case, one of the important points is when we went back to Zimbabwe, that was in the year 1980, and that was when Zimbabwe was actually born as a nation. It used to be called Rhodesia. It was a British colony. And you remember what those were, British colonies. Actually, the British used to go around the world to far-off countries and say things like this: this land from there to there now belongs to the crown. And so it was. Does that sound familiar, anyone? Maybe happened here. Anyway, long story short, it was a country steeped in segregation. So dark-skinned people, black, Asian, etc., were considered second-class citizens. And as a result of that, it meant that someone like me couldn't go to good schools, or did I just go blue all of a sudden?
Yeah,
and I guess if I come forward, it solves that problem. And so, long story short, when we arrived in the country, a man called Robert Mugabe took charge, and he became, in years after that, from 1980 through to, I guess, when he was deposed in 2017, he became a dictator. And for those of you who don't know what dictators are, they're these megalomaniac, very, very powerful leaders of countries who let it get to their heads, and they don't like opposition. They get very draconian laws in place, etc. They're not the smartest people. Actually, and I don't mean that in an insulting way. I'll give you an example. There was a guy called Idi Amin. Anyone remember Idi Amin? Well, he constructed this extremely luxurious boat and he christened it the Idiot. So that's not a true story, by the way. That's another gag. But anyway, dictators, I obviously jest at his expense, but dictators are very cruel people at times. They slaughter, they murder, they throw people who don't like their ideas into prison on trumped up charges, etc. Anyway, I grew up in Robert Mugabe's Zimbabwe, and for maybe 20 years he was a normal leader, but at least we weren't exposed to the kind of tyrant that he was. Until, of course, the thing called the internet came to be, and you could research, you didn't have to go to a library, you could just Google something and you could find out information, good and bad. And so that, I guess, began the journey of me starting to question the kind of leader he was, and that led me to do a political protest, which led to my exile. I'm kind of jumping ahead of the story here because I've given you the overview. Let me get into the micro minuetta, if you will. So, as a kid going to boarding school, I was always one of those kids who found the Christian education very natural. So I went to two schools that I would say were Anglican schools. I mean, they were government schools, they were state schools, but they had an Anglican way of education. It was Christian ethos, etc. So one of the things to illustrate that was we had chapel service every Sunday. So you got dressed up in your best dress, you went to church and or chapel, and you sung really old-fashioned hymns and songs. We used to do the English hymnal, we'd do the thing called evensong, there was all sorts of liturgy and all that sort of stuff, so you'd kneel and you stand up and you say things, we did the confession. And so that became very natural to me, and I always kind of veered towards that. I always felt that was very plausible to me. But when I got to high school, of course, my belief in that idea of a creative God was challenged. So let me summarize the dilemma that I was put in. This is cutting in and out. Let me stand here, maybe it'll be better. So when I would go to chapel sorry, we've got a videographer, he's got to keep following me. So when I would go to chapel on Sunday, I would be told something like this. And some of you have heard the story, and this is a full gospel business. It's not fellowship anymore, but you know what I mean. So I'm sure you've heard the story of the creation. I'm sure you understand what the implications of that are. The idea being there was a God. He was eternal, he's uncreated, and I can't even say at a point in time because time didn't exist, but there came a moment when he said, I want to create. And God created the world in a relatively short space of time, according to the Bible. And he made it beautiful, he made it perfect, and it was flawless. And then he made a man, and he gave him a woman, and she ate him out of his home. Something like that, right? So, well, he shouldn't have eaten the fruit. He was an idiot as well. But anyway, there was the fall. And with it came terrible consequences. Not only death, but obviously pain, suffering, destruction. And if the story is true, God from the very beginning says that he will bring restoration to this broken world. So he talks about the serpent's head being crushed, and the seed of the woman, her seed would be, his heel would be bruised, etc. And God then works throughout history, through the nation of Israel, working towards a plan of sending a Redeemer, who is Christ, and he dies on a cross, etc., etc. If that story is true, and I believe it is, and I'm sure many of you do here, it means we're not here by accident. We're here with a purpose, as a creator, a divine mind, an amazing, incredibly creative mind as well, that put this place together. And indeed, it's plausible, because whenever we see anything in nature that seems to have come from a mind, we go, wow. Take, for example, a car. Right? When you see a car, you go, wow. Especially if it's a beautiful car like a Tesla. You say, wow, the minds that made that were amazing. The engineering, the curves, the technology, etc. Right? You see a building, you think, there's a builder who put this together. There's an architect, etc., etc. And so, for me, it was very plausible. It made sense that if those things which are complex need a mind and a builder, a creator, a world which is even more complex, with organic material that can reproduce, for example, it demands that there must be something greater behind it, right? I mean, it's infinitely more complex than a car or a building. And so for me, when I used to look at the night sky in Zimbabwe, growing up as a little boy, I used to marvel at how amazing it was. By the way, it's very easy to see the night sky in Africa. Because of all the power cuts, there's no light pollution, so there's Venus, so... but the vastness of it as well. I mean, have we found the end of the universe? There may be an end, there must be, I guess, but it's so vast. It's mind-boggling how infinitesimally insignificant we feel when we stand in an open. You stand on the beach and you look out to the Gulf of St. Vincent. It goes on and on. You can hardly see the other side unless it's a clear day. And the ocean stretches for tens of thousands of miles, even further than that. I couldn't possibly see it all at once. How far we are from the sun and the moon and all that. These are vast celestial bodies. This mind always thought, wow, it is amazing. Except, I didn't grow up in a vacuum, did I? I'd go to biology class on Monday and hear that that's all baloney. Great Greek theological word, hey? No, actually it's Italian. Anyway, the story there is that actually there is no requirement for a deity. There's no requirement for a God. All you need is billions and billions of years and nothing exploding. Yeah? Nothing exploded. And then there was the primordial soup, which got zapped by a bolt of lightning. Where did the soup come from? Where did the lightning go? Doesn't matter. It's a complicated question. Don't be silly, right? So then you had these primordial, very simple amino acids, which then got a spark of life from somewhere. Now we know that you only get life from life, right? Right? Am I right? You only see life being passed on from a parent to its descendants. But on this occasion, something supernatural happened. Non-living matter became alive. And then let's say it became an amoeba. I mean, I'm not a scientist myself, but let's say it became more complex and then became a fish, or let's call it a swimming worm, and then it became a fish, and then it became an amphibian, millions and millions of years. And then, of course, it became a land-walking mammal, because according to the movie Lara Croft's Tomb Raider, all life, evolution happened in Africa. And if you know anything about Africans, we don't prefer the water. We are not very good at swimming, and you will not see us in the 100 meters freestyle final in the Olympics, okay? You will see us on land, 100 meters, right? So apparently, but there's a progression. You get amphibian, it grows legs and arms from fins, and then it becomes a gorilla, which is great-great-great-great-great-grandma. Something like that. From the goo to the zoo to you. Highly evolved pond scum. How do you feel about yourself, yes? And so, long story short, I didn't buy that one. And but it's a wrestle, isn't it? Because to pass your exams, you have to talk about evolution and all that. But on Sunday, we're talking about vast spiritual concepts like confession of sin and morality and a creator who holds you accountable. And so this young man was going back and forth, back and forth. Actually, I didn't become a Christian until I was 16. I thought there's an easier way to finding peace with the universe. So I initially tried yoga. Anyone heard of yoga? So, long story short, I had a lot of problems with yoga. The first is I couldn't sit in the lotus position after my growth spurt. That's the one with cross-legged. Yeah, I couldn't do that. But there was a book I bought called Teach Yourself Yoga. Or maybe it was Yoga for Idiots, I'm not sure. And it had a number of exercises, spiritual exercises, that would help you find, I think they call it bliss, or samadhi, or nirvana, something like that. And basically you're supposed to empty yourself, or empty your mind of anything, which is easy because there's not a lot up in mind. And then you're supposed to start imagining, using your imagination. And the first exercise is, imagine an apple. Can imagine, no, not an Apple computer, just an apple. And that's very easy for me, so I thought I can imagine. I'm pretty artistic, so I imagined an apple. And then the second exercise was imagine, by the way, you're supposed to practice, it's all about work. So after a few weeks, I then graduated to the second stage, which is imagine you're sitting in an apple. And then the third exercise is imagine you've become an apple. And it was at that point that I thought, nah. I reckon I've heard someone who says, He knows the way, the truth, and the life. Have you heard of him? And so I started to look at this man called Jesus, his claims, a little more closely. I went on a Christian youth camp, and it was there that I heard the gospel message. The camp director got up and he read primarily from the book of Romans. He talked about the case, the legal case against humanity, that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We can't meet the standard of holding God's law perfectly. None of us. We've all failed. And of course, there are consequences to that. And Romans 3:26, I believe, is the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. Oh, I mixed that up. Romans 6:26. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. And you then read from Romans 10, which states, all who called on the name of the Lord shall be saved. So at the age of 16, I did that. I said just a very short prayer. I actually repeated after him. Remember those days? Repeat after me if you want to accept Jesus in your heart. And I was very sincere about it. I really wanted to know my sins were forgiven and I wouldn't go to hell if there was such a place, and that I would go to heaven if there was such a place. And so I invited God to come into my life, and I was a Christian from that moment on. That was December 92, I think it was. I was 16. So for the rest of my years in school, I joined the Christian group, and I really got involved in Christian life. I went to Bible studies, I was involved in the choir, we'd sing Christian songs, etc. And it wasn't really until I left school and I joined a small charismatic or Pentecostal church that I really got confronted with the idea that God is still at work in our world, like he was way back when. For some reason, no disrespect to Anglican circles, but it just seemed, growing up in those circles, that God had kind of done stuff and then stopped doing it. Yeah. He wasn't really personally involved in our lives anymore with all our stuff. And I'm not suggesting that God today will do anything and everything for anyone who asks. No, people will pray for healing and they won't get it. And people will ask to win the state lottery and they won't. I know those of you who played because you laughed. Maybe not. Anyway, but long story short, I came to an understanding that there is a God who's real and who's contemporary, who's alive, and who wants to work in my life if I submit my life to him. And so I then became a cricket player, traveled all over the world, and I then sat under the leadership or mentorship of a man called Fred Sorrells. He was an American evangelist who'd come out to Africa, and he was using baseball, which is a strange sport, because we don't really play baseball in Africa, but he's using baseball as a vehicle to share the gospel. And he's really the man who dropped in me the desire to share this amazing message that there is a God. He's revealed himself, and he wants to enter into a personal relationship with human beings. And the amazing thing is he gives us that choice as to whether we will respond to that invitation or not. And so that has taken me all over the world. Of course, it took me to the 1040 window, as we used to call it back then, we still call it that, and Asia, so we're talking Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. I travelled there, shared many times there in churches and at various schools. The love of Jesus from New Zealand, South Africa, the West Indies, England, etc. And had a tremendous amount of pleasure brought through success in sport, also defeat, but also the opportunity to travel and see the vastness of the world, to see the variety of God's people, to see how God loves different cultures, and to embrace that and to love it. And so, long story short, after my exile, I lived in England, and while we were there, I then felt, what's the next stage of my life, now that my cricket's over? And I felt I really wanted to go back into sharing in ministry. And that took me into various places, including the odd youth offender or prison. Certainly went to a prison in Scotland where I was really convicted that it was something the Lord wanted to move me into. And so when I came to this country, of course I bumped into Helen Glanville, who's the CEO of Second Chances. At that prayer breakfast which I spoke, I met a couple of people here who went to the prayer breakfast 2015, and I've had a good working relationship with Second Chances since then. Long story short, I share in schools, I share whenever I'm given the opportunity. share businesses. I work with a guy called Peter Daniels. He's a life coach or business coach. Right now I'm a singer. I'm an artist. I paint. I do videography. I do audio mixing. I'm a licorice all sorts, jack of all trades, master of none. And I really love what I'm doing. At the moment, I'm actually doing a course called the Colson Fellows Program. So some of you may have heard of Chuck Colson. He was an advisor to Nixon. Is that right? Watergate? Yep. And long story short, he had a conversion experience, and he kind of confessed to a crime that wasn't even in the books. And he went to prison, and while he was there, he got, I don't know whether conversion happened in prison or after or before, but anyway, long story short, he set up, or was very instrumental in setting up Prison Fellowship. And so, obviously it's close to my heart, and also I need some ministerial training. But I've got a couple more brochures I'll let you know, so I'll have a look at some of the courses there to see if I can get more of a business mind. But I think that's my story. My story is, at this point in life, I'm a dad of 2 kids, and the Lord has preserved my life. By the way, there's so many angles to my story, but I'll say this: the Lord has saved my life 3 times. I got kidnapped by a lady in Italy when we were on an educational tour, and the only reason I got away was obviously they discovered I was missing. They raised the alarm, and the white lady couldn't justify how I was her child. So that's why I got away. I almost drowned in Sri Lanka, got caught up in a riptide. I called out to the Lord. I really did. I remember that scripture. All the call in the name of the Lord shall be saved. I did get saved. And I also got carjacked in Harare, and went on a 2-hour joyride with these thugs who wanted my car. It was a sponsored car, it wasn't really mine. I was like, you can have it. But it was very hair-raising, and they kept on threatening to kill me. They had guns, they had knives, they stabbed me. It was quite a hairy story. But long story short, it was one of those moments in life when you do a deal with God. Lord, if you get me through this moment, I will do whatever you want me to do. I'll go wherever you send me, etc. And so, you know, I think I was 24. I'm now 46, and I always am reminded about my pledge to the Lord, or my vow, if you will, that I would serve Him. And hopefully I am doing that. And finally, I'm a singer now. So I did a concert last night. I was part of a festival, and you know, the Lord has given me more opportunities to share that gift and talent. And as was mentioned by Stefan, I was on The Voice. I got to the 3rd stage, and then my coach, Kenny Rowland, chose a rapper over me. So she's obviously got good taste. Anyway, that's my story. I hope you're encouraged by it. I'll encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, keep believing, keep trusting the Lord. These are perilous times, really, in one sense, aren't they? I don't know where we are on the timeline. I'm not into eschatology, but it just looks like the stage is being set for a lot of deception in our world, and I think we need to be very, very discerning. Thank you.
Fantastic. Now I'm going to ask Henry to sing. If you can cue up one more song. Wasn't that amazing? That was truly, truly an amazing story. So what we're going to do now is we can stay seated. Henry's going to give us another song. I've just said to pick one of his choice. After that, I'll come back on. We'll go into our prayer time where we get to pray for each other and close the meeting. So Henry, would you give us something, one of your favourites?
Well, I'm going to go back to my Anglican roots now, and I'm going to sing the Lord's Prayer, but this is the Albert Hamer Lottie version for you musically minded people. It's an older, it's a kind of more modern version, like from the 1940s, but just fraught with a great lyrical expression. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the
Oh, man.